Buenos días a todos. Muchas
Good
gracias
morning.
por
Thank you. Thank you for participating in this new MA. We're going to be talking about testing in GeneXus. First of all, we're going to have a presentation an introduction by all the presenters, then a brief presentation about the themes and topics, and then there will be a Q&A period. You'll have to open your microphone and, if possible, your camera. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Jose Lamas, Product Manager. Good afternoon. Welcome. As Aníbal said, my name is Jose Lamas. I'm a product manager of GeneXus, of GXT. And the idea is that all our team introduces themselves because we have all the people here with us. So Ursula, please. Hello, my name is Ursula Bartram. I work in GeneXus and I lead the testing team and GeneXus releases. Hello, my name is Noelia Gonzalez. I work in the testing area. Juan Pablo Gonzalez. I work in the Android developer team. Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Muniz. I work in the testing area in GeneXus, particularly in the software testing area. Marco Pipino, also from the team, and I also work as software engineer manager. Germán, good afternoon. My name is Germán González, and I'm the program manager of GX Test. I work with Abstracta, and I work with all this team for testing with GeneXus. I'm going to present the new things in this past year regarding testing in GeneXus. I'm going to tell you what we are working on and what we'll be doing next year. Now, as regards the main pieces of news, here you have the change log, and you can have access to the changes that we've been releasing. Let me tell you the highlights of what we've done in this past year. The first thing is the test suites object, which allows us to group different types of tests. As a tester and as a user, I may be automating because of its functions or criticality, or because of the way a certain part of the app allows me to add certain tests to define the order or properties that I'd like the execution to continue, you know, the setup objects and all the initial setup of the test suite. For instance, if I need certain data on my database or a particular part, which is in an object, so that I could set it and then leave it for another execution. Then we added support for executing the browser, you know, for the headless browser support or any other argument supporting the browser. So these are arguments supported by the browser. For instance, open up a window or the incognito function, and you can do it in different scenarios. That we can do it with a new property that we've added to that end for an interface test. We've also added a new functionality. As a user, as a developer, I can modify an object and I can easily execute unit tests, data provider, whatever object that can be unit tested, and you can run the tests. Another functionality available for unit tests is to be able to choose the values obtained as expected, you know, mainly for an initial execution. For instance, you create the unit test, you put the data at the beginning. I'm not going to calculate manually which is the result I expect. but I can make the first execute. I can check that the results obtained are the ones expected according to the test, and I can say, all right, this is fine. And what we do is we modify the data provider. We use the data with the data expected. And the consequence of this is that the idea is that for the next execution, since that test, I've already checked that the data are all right, the next execution will be fine because the object under test will be as expected. Then if you change the functioning, the object unit test will identify if I've made any changes. Then we've added new commands, mainly for the web part. And it's worth underlining that, we have the commands or the names of controls in GeneXus that were only for HTML. Now we can program them directly and put the name of the control without having to go to the HTML and browsing it with the name of the variable, with tables. There are new commands then with a higher attraction level. We are working with the control names in GeneXus as we can see it. We've also added support for UI tests on Android. That was only for OIS, and now it's for Android. We made an Allude integration that has to do with Jenkins and continuous integration. And what we can do is export the test results in a format that allows us to have more information than the JUnit, which was the one that you could export, but this is really thought for unit tests. And the advantage of Allure is that it has a more detailed resolution, all the details of the browser, where the tests are, every command, every execution, and information about the suite, and you keep a historical record of all the executions, and it allows us to detect which tests have been failing, or if there is any failure that occur because of a commit or any changes in the commit by a developer. So it's more granular, it goes to further details. And then on Allure integration, as from Jenkins, if you have a server with a plugin with Allure, you'll be able to see the results of the tests with this framework. Then GeneXus recording can be used to record flows easily, particularly for execution tests of web XCM. And we can do it from the IDE. And you can launch for the recording from there through an option on the menu. And so it would ask the name of the test, and you can set a name for the test, and you do the recording as usual. And then there's a function at the end when you say, well, I've already recorded, I've sent this data, you go back to the IDE, you can confirm the changes, and you can execute it in the KB or wherever you've selected a folder or whatever. And then lastly, and this is very recent, it's come in with upgrade 6 that it's about to be launched. It is the image comparison. We are working on this in mobile as well. Basically, the idea is that we can make automatic visual checkups if my app change in relation to the execution. So the idea here is that since you record it once, and that's the way I want my page to look like, and it was similar to assertion, and then in future times you can get a screenshot and you can compare the present screenshot with the one you already had, and you, for instance, you erase or the page doesn't look fine, or there are elements that you didn't like, or something is overlapping something else. If it's different from the expected image, this will allow you automatically to detect that type of visual error in the app. So as I said, these are the main news. This is the main news that we think are important. There are other functionalities that we've been working on and releasing, and that you can check in the change log that we have up there on the screen. Now, as regards what we are working on right now, on the one hand, there are many things that are related to one another, and the idea is to be able to run the tests, not necessarily where GeneXus is installed. For instance, if you have QA and you want to run unit tests there, or integration as well, and you can do the test there. And so the idea is that I may, as a user, take my tests to the deploy or QA environment and execute the test there and have the results of those tests as a status report and see where the app is. Then on the other hand, together with this, the test deployment, as you can see there, we are also working on improving the execution speed. And to that end, we need a runner that can execute in other environments that don't have GeneXus, and they can have the result list as you have it now. A potential improvement that we thought about this is to be able to how to make these tests in a certain way that we are working on. And if you look at the change log, you may have seen that there is a possibility that we've been working on to create tests for REST objects, you know, the GeneXus object. You know, you can make a REST call. We still have some missing details, but we're working on it, you know, communication service and a little bit more parameterizations of the environment or URL you want to test, the service that you're working on and that you want to test. And lastly, and this is something that we've been working on and it's practically finished, is to be able to stop very quickly any test execution from the IDE. So you can cancel the process, basically. Now, what we are going to have here is an operation that will allow us to stop or cancel and stop the execution. It's quite intuitive. I'm explaining it too much. It's simply going to stop the execution, and the others are going to be canceled. And then for the rest of this year and for the year ahead, well, the idea is to give it some iteration for REST objects, but we are also going to be using more, adding more commands, more interface command, and improve the ones we have for mobile and web, you know, for mobile to be able to interact with alert systems and the question of permits, and to add support in order to interact more clearly with those windows. And then also in web to be able to interact with associated links. You know, you can open up one of the fields and to make it more intuitive, as I said earlier, talking about the support in this type of thing. These are the main drivers then for next year, and we'll be working on this. There are other functionalities as well, but something important to highlight here is that it's very important what you can suggest and comment on, and what is it that you are needing the most. You know, we've been shaping it according to the tests, and the idea is to continue working. And if there are any situations coming up, then we can look into them and make all this experience more simple. But basically, if we go to the main drivers, the idea is to have better data capabilities to be able to import and export data from CSV files, which tester can do. You know, it generates the test data, the domain, equivalence, class, or whatever to be used, and that you can take it and change it internally without having someone to have an IDE and modify and change the data provider, but that you can do it directly from other sources. For instance, you could do it with JSON, but perhaps it's not as easy to be used as a CSV file. We've also been working on mock, both for database and procedures in GeneXus, to be able to effectively isolate, that's a unit test with one object, depending on other objects that are not, I don't necessarily want them to be coupling for some reason they are not. And we're working on trying to improve mock for database and also adding support for other procedures and functions of the object that requires mock in GeneXus. Now, as UI automation and very much connected to what we've added, what I've said about adding support, control areas. And the idea is that this is kept at a higher level and can be defined, that the controls can be defined through references controls instead of using streams. And that's the objective. Well, the initial objective was that, and now we are transitioning to that way of programming so that you can program directly the control you want to use. And there are more commands in general that are coming up with different functionalities. That is more functionalities for visual testing. This isn't very much defined, but on the basis of what you'll be trying out and image comparison, you can tell us what's missing. This has been mentioned, this with adding this validation with visual testing. And then lastly, something we've been working on the JMeter plugin, which is a performance tool of applications. And the idea is to carry on and working on encryption and decryption of parameters automatically, and to do it in a much easier way, because sometimes it could be a little bit burdensome, with this things with applications. And what it says there to recognize parameterization and to make it more robust and take the beta for the JMeter of GeneXus. That is all then. If you have any questions or any suggestions, they're most welcome now. If you have any questions, open your microphones and your cameras so that we can see you. While you think about your question, let me ask you a question. How can we start including these tests? Well, to start with, that's a question that has been asked several times. Sometimes it's difficult to start with all this. And you can do it in many ways, with a procedure that may be complex to keep or very important for the system. If you want to create a unit test, perhaps the first test, I can add a pipeline to the unit test and you can run it and you automate it. And then you continue adding another object that may be important to unit test. And that's the easiest way, I think, to start with, start little by little and see what value there is, and then continue adding as you go along, as the app requires it. We've got a question from Mexico. Several, is there a roadmap integration with SonarQube? We have been asked on several occasions to add them within the pipelines. Well, no, we haven't got that integration with SonarQube on our roadmap. I don't have very clear in mind what the metrization is here, what it refers to. What you mean by integration here? Why would you be interested in this? The dynamic analysis in the DevOps. I understand that SonarQube allows you to make static code analysis. And this means that in the case of GeneXus, since the code on which you can execute this would be the code generated, you could miss the abstraction level for a GeneXus user, thinking logically and writing logically in the GeneXus abstraction level. But perhaps the results of SonarQube, which are static analysis of the code generated, like JBA, perhaps it isn't the best. Now, as regards integration, well, I haven't got any experience with SonarQube, but as it happens with all tools, it allows you an execution through a command line or a similar mechanism. And as such, it can be easily integrated to any pipeline, Jenkins or whatever you could do it. As I said, it's not very clear to me whether that's the best thing for GeneXus development environment. Now, as regards to static analysis, we've got developed some tools in GeneXus and also in the GeneXus consulting team that may really be more meaningful and more useful because they are done in the abstraction level, developed by and anyway, we made a partnership with Veracode, and which I think is similar to SonarQube. Yes, that's right. Yes, you're right. And that's mainly on the point from the point of view of security. Well, yes, but SonarQube also has security involved. Yes, I was thinking about the code quality, and that's why I couldn't see it very well because of the abstraction level. But it's true from the security standpoint, independent on how it's written, it's important that it's secure. So, right. If you allow me, SonarQube is also giving you the possibility of having plugins. If I understand you correctly, what the question is, suppose you have a company with a certain infrastructure and it's doing things with SonarQube for other systems. You would probably also like to have this with GeneXus. I'd also like to have it because it has many problems that have been solved already, reporting and many things. If we could have something similar, analyzing the static code of GeneXus, native, and detecting certain problems and reporting them to that platform, we would be saving quite a lot of work. Well, I can see this as something possible, but of course, a lot of work has to be done to that end. But you mean the GeneXus code directly, Enrique? Well, yes. In the same way you have the security scanner right now, but instead of running it on the GeneXus IDE, it could run on SonarQube, right? Yes, right. Mm-hmm. And so in that way, with CI extension or others that have many other controls in place. So it would be, a question of choosing a platform for the static code analysis, and you could put in different plugins. SonarQube is one, but it's for .NET or Java. It has many languages established. If we could put in parser and everything you need to do it, I understand it's a lot of work, but well. But what you are saying, if I understand you correctly, is not to use it as a code analyzer, but as a driver for the execution and presentation of results. So if you could have a plugin allowing you from SonarQube to trigger static analysis at, yes, SonarQube would be the framework for static code analysis. GeneXus, right? Yes, I understand. Mm-hmm. And you got another question? Yes. Now, as regards what you said, Herman, regarding the REST system with the API object, what's the plan you've got? Well, the idea is to have unit test and test the API objects. The idea is that it can support. And what about OA objects? You know, with objects without protocol. No, well, everything that can allows you to, everything allows you to be defined. Well, the API object doesn't support it, and I'm not sure if it's going to support it. Certain point. Well, perhaps as far as I know. You mean the internal object type of web server, or no? For instance, I've got a procedure with swap, but I would like to test it as swap, not as a procedure. So you are exposing a web server. You are exposing, yes. It would be like testing instead of testing REST servers. Do it well. No, we haven't got specific plans right now, but that's among the things that we could do. The idea precisely is that any unit that could be executed and that you can send certain values and check the results, it's a subject, it's a test subject that we can do.
Mientras se genera una nueva instancia, una nueva pregunta, tiro otra más genérica, ¿no?
Very well. I've got a more generic question. Is this a methodological change? Well, the answer is that it is, and perhaps if we are thinking about how to start, the idea is that as a developer, the idea is that whenever you can support it or create tests for the code I'm creating, is like a working methodology. But it's also a backup, you know, so that very clearly I can know how the code I've just written should behave. And so I go back a year later to look at that code, and it's a way of working, you know, how this should behave. So it's a methodological change in the sense that you have to be a bit more responsible for what you're doing. And it's a way of automating the functioning. That is how my test object or the object I'm developing should behave. The question is whether it's a methodological change of having automated tests. And what tools are provided to make that change? Well, as regards tools, well, the functionalities available, the fact of having the test, because, you know, the idea is to help the initial creation, you know, a test that could be sometimes, you know, setting up the entire scenario, you know, choosing the data for the test. You know, the idea is that GeneXus test allows you to create an initial framework very quickly to be used as an ideal base to develop the test on the object. You know, you create an ST of you know, the starting data required by the object, and a field, you know, called the assertions, things that are more intuitive regarding the data that are being generated. And then the question of the various integrations, because the idea can be executed on a pipeline through an execution of GeneXus operations. You can do this with testing as well, and then integration as the visualization of results, and that's fundamental for to be able to see very quickly, or if I want to see a summary or a detail of the execution status of the tests I have on the system. And I think that those are the most important tools regarding definition. Well, the execution, and also its fundamental thing is to be able to visualize in a friendly manner the results of the test execution. So all those are things that we believe are fundamental. And as we said, we are also working hard on how to manage the data. And that's the most complex thing at present. And we are trying to find a solution. That is how to manage easily, if you require a particular status of the database at the time of making the test. And that's why we're talking about mark and functions in the database. Excuse me. I'd like to make a comment, Aníbal, about these methodological changes. Out of experience of when you start working with testing, GeneXus environment or traditional environments, one of the things that insofar as it makes the generation of this unit test more easily, and you can make them work more easily, it also promotes writing better codes, because you have that motivation, because it's easy to be able to define units that are more formalized in terms of what they receive and what they are expected to do, and the possibility to be able to test it easily and define all the cases that you're interested in testing. That motivates you and promotes that you have units that are more decoupled, and that that separates the interface of that unit of the rest, and it allows you that in case there is a change in the implementation that you'll need, that you are confident that you can do it insofar as you have a good battery validating not only how it is implemented inside, but how it behaves in the system. And in general terms, and I'm saying this out of experience, but it's a generalized comment in all those working on testing, the fact of being able to promote a better code and to have more agility. That is, it allows you to make evolutions knowing that things are going to be working well in the system. And we've got a question from Laura Aguilar, and it's talking more about licensing for UI test. Do you need a GeneXus license for every tester programming UI test? And she's also asking about the GX server license and what is required for it. Now, in terms of licensing, well, tester has it's for GeneXus server, and it's partial. As regards to GeneXus, no license is required for unit tests. If you develop it with GeneXus, IDE, and UI, doesn't require a license. Now, for UI tests, you are required to have a license at present, but we are assessing and perhaps will make it equivalent to unit tests, not requiring license. A license is only required for GeneXus server. I could be doing some individual work with IDE without a license, but when I want to make a commit and the test objects, that GX server will require a license. So what is licensed and what's validated, whether there is a license or not, is in the GX server. But as I said, for the UI, which it's also required for IDE. We are assessing it, and most certainly will make it equivalent to unit tests that don't require license. Yes, the upgrade 5, it's already taken away the license, for all the interface. But to wrap up the question of license, in fact, the question is that I've got a server that has, I've got a GX server where I bought 10 licenses because I have 10 developers, but now I have 3 testers in my team. And do I have to buy 3 additional licenses? That's the question. Well, in fact, there are no license per developer in the server. The server has a license for a maximum of X number of users. Testing users, what is required is that the server of whatever size has a license, but then you are using license without nominating it. Everyone would make a commit. Yes, the same as for commit. What's nominated is the registered users. But you can define n number of users. It's for developers, testers, whatever. Is it clear? It's like a commit for each GX server, which doesn't depend whether it's Java, whatever. Right, yes, I understand. But it's the commit goes against a nominated server name. So you need a name, because if a tester makes a commit, it needs a special license to make that commit. Well, yes, but that's what we are trying to explain, that yes, yeah. Well, it's that the use permission license depends on the number of users you need, Eduardo is also making a comment. If you work on 3 different GX servers of different clients, do you need a license in each one of them? Yes, each one of those GX servers may have a license and support as many other testers. Well, it depends. For GX server that are public, they all have it.
Por ahí tenemos una de Sandro Viana.
Sandro Viana is also asking a question. He says, today we've got a large challenge ahead, which is to change our programming paradigm, events and making them a procedure. Is there any work on our patterns for that paradigm to be adopted as a pattern and to facilitate our lives? Well, I wouldn't know how to answer that question. Let me see if I have understood you. The patterns generating the code of web events, and you are taking it as a procedure to be able to test it, right? Yeah. Well, I don't know what pattern specifically, perhaps Mobile Plus, but yes, WWP, yes. We've been working on how to be able to change it, not to generate the code, but so far we haven't been successful in working together on that. But we are thinking to see whether we can coordinate with them to work more closely. But so far there is nothing planned. But we know it's ideal that for the code to be tested, it has to be on an object of a pure logic, basically. But so far we haven't got it. There's nothing about it. Very well. Any further questions? Any comments that you'd like to make? Eduardo hasn't answered. I think that Jose answered that question. If I've got 3 GX server, yes, yes, I've answered it. But let me repeat. Yes, each GX server controls its license independently.
Sandro, si no, decir,
Sandro, perhaps it'd be good that you ask, Mobile Plus, as your client there, perhaps you can ask whether, share the problems that that is causing, the way patterns are generated at present. Let me go back on the question. For a consulting firm working with the different customers and clients, and it's providing GX server, and the client has 10 developers, and it has to buy 10 GX tests, and perhaps there's just one. If you multiply that times the number of clients to be able to provide the service, all clients should buy a license with all the users that each GX server has. Haven't you thought about the possibility of changing the way of licensing instead of doing it with GX server, which is an object repository, or because I think that licensing is mixing up with other things, and sometimes for us it's limiting a lot. Yes, the specific question is whether we've analyzed changing the licensing, the way we do the licensing. Well, yes, we are analyzing it, and there is a possibility that we'll make some changes there. Anyway, I'm trying to focus on what we've got at present, and that what we've got at present is clear. One of the things included there is the question of the paradigm change and methodology and so on. One of the strong changes coming ahead is that it's not our way of thinking traditionally when we said, I've got 10 developers and 1 tester. But one of the large changes is that the test is part of what's being developed. And precisely when you're doing unit tests, the unit tests are carried out by the developer. The code that has all GeneXus power and using things in the KB, and that may call other procedures, that may ask questions to the database. It is part of what's being developed, as opposed to the other type of tests, like black boxes. I've got a system, I give it to someone to test it. He has no access to anything, and it tests. You can also do it with GX tests tools. Anyway, if I've got a team that is developing a knowledge base, even if I don't have a GX server, I can have a copy of that KB, and I can have working code copy. I can execute the test of that working copy and do that with no problem, and that doesn't require any license at all. Now, if I want those tests, and then again we go back to the question of changes in paradigm. At present, once I've got that, that's not enough. What I want is, once I've written those tests, I don't want it to be executed by one single person. I'd rather have it inside my repository, so all developers can have access to those same tests, and that each one of those developers in their own copy, whenever they make changes, have the possibility of executing the test, obtaining the results, and modifying their objects or modifying the tests. And in that case, I do have to make a commit to be able to share it in the repository, and that's where I'll need, and it's natural that the GX server has a license to support that type of thing. if you push it up to the extreme where you have one person absolutely outside, well, yes, he can do it. But in general terms, in today's world, we have continuous integration, DevOps, and tests are one more object. And myself as a developer in my work copy, I may want to have a procedure and where I'm looking at its way of modified. I would like every time and I modify it that to have the expected results and test. And anyway, we've got things on the table to look at, the licensing way and some advantages on that side. But the line of reasoning is that. Is that clear? Yes. Yes. Well, I was thinking that you could have a client and you have 10 gig server licenses, and you have 4 projects, and you're going to start with just one project with 3 people, and they're going to be doing tests and commit, but your license is for 10, even if it's used by 3, and the others are at a different stage. Yes, right. Well, but the same thing happens with everything else. If you have a GeneXus that has the capacity of generating in Java.NET or perhaps in a project, you're not using any of that, but you have the GeneXus license, so it's a similar thing. It's also a marketing issue. Any other questions? I've got a question. Have you already released that part of the testing? Yes, it's released. GeneXus 17 upgrade, when was that? No, that's all right. So 5 is out, right? Yes, it's released. Yes, it was early this year. Thank you. Yes, upgrade 3. Can I ask a question the other way around? I was thinking about this question of changes, start making tests and so on. I'm sure that there are many who have done it. Enrique has been working on testing for a long time and has bought the idea. And there are many of you who have not started and you're interested in starting. So my question is for those who haven't started yet, what have you, what are the hurdles? What are the difficulties that you've come across? What do you feel is missing still? See if someone dares to tell us. No one raises their hands. Let's see. All right. It says, can I answer? Sure, yes. What's difficult? All right, it's difficult to make tests. It's difficult to keep the test. It's also difficult to keep the data of the test and to monitor the test and redirect. I mean, the entire process is difficult, and it's difficult because it gives you a lot of work. Benefits are enormous, but the work it takes is very big, particularly when you've already got something that's developed and you have to add tests to that. So that's what really hurts you the most, particularly when you put in tests, and that's part of what you were saying about the methodology. You realize how badly you had programmed before, and that hurts you. It hurts me, at least. And so the programs that you test, that you add tests to, are smaller, are easier to understand, and and they're not so much coupled one to the others, but it hurts. The process isn't an easy thing. I think that this addition, to be able to generate the test and have the result given on a database can help you to creating those tests in an easier manner. From my standpoint, and mixing this up with the question of licensing, unit tests should be free of charge from all standpoints, for one person, for 10, or for 100 persons, and automated as well, so that and I'm saying this about someone else's work, and I'm sorry if I'm going into something I shouldn't be there, but there are many tools for unit tests that are free, and that would be my ideal, that the unit test is free of charge. But of course, what's difficult to see, if you do unit tests, things look better. You program better. That's simply as simple as that. But it's difficult to see it because it gives you a lot of work. And until you do it, well, you don't realize it. And then one of the things that I think are something that you have to work hard on is to keep the data test. And Germán said that you're working on it. The status of the database needed for automated test is a complex problem. It's not easy to solve. Yes, precisely when it's tests on processes that are very strong on the database. The easy thing is when it doesn't record anything, doesn't do anything, it's easy to do a mock. But when you have processes whose results depend on the initial status of the database, yes, I agree with you. And when you have to test things that modify or change the database, it's very difficult to keep a database without any changes. It's the strong thing is to manage data and database, and testing suffers when you are changing the database. So you are, in a continuous struggle there. Well, to support that idea, I think that the cost to start, particularly everything regarding the interface, is not a minor thing, because you have to learn how to do it. We haven't got a long way, a long experience. It's not a question that I'm going to start with this. With the interface, the road is not very clear, best practice and so on. You have to learn how to do it. You have the question of data, which is complicated, complex, and so on. You have the question of licenses. All these are barriers that come up, and to say, well, I'm really making good use of my investment, it's really very hard work. So you get to that status where we all agree on that you have multiple purposes. It's not an easy task to start. To follow it up, it's fine, but to start, to have a critical mass, well, it's difficult. And it's along the same line as Enrique said, any cost, maintaining license and so on, or to have better practices and so on. Here, for instance, not only in general, but in a more advanced status, how the tool is used and how you would make such and such a test. I think all those things help you out, so that one of those barriers are easier to overcome. Mm-hmm.
Viste que yo ni siquiera me metí con UI, ¿no?
I didn't even dare go into UI. I just kept to unit tests, because UIs are a different scale. Well, that's what hurts you the most. I think that I agree with everything you're saying, regarding the difficulties. I understand that they are in line with what we've got on the table in our radar that we are focusing on, and we are working on it. But it's good to be open to, listening, either because you're confirming or saying things. And something else, which as far as I've understood, is about to be solved already, is that it's essential to be able to run the tests on execution environments without having any contact with GeneXus. Yes, Herman mentioned that. That's one of the things we're working on, and it's one of the strong pillars, not only for GXT, but also for many other tools such as GeneXus that are working on that. It is to focus on those processes and environments for continuous integration, continuous development, and the visual test is not only for copy, but I would like to package it to execute it and remotely. And let me ask you something else since I'm here. It's very good that that unit test objects are not reachable by anyone, and that's good. It doesn't create any dependence. It doesn't complicate the call tree and so on. Now, about the warning of the reachable object couldn't be avoided somehow, because when I specify objects, when I do this build all, you get this warning up, and I'm so much against these warnings because they really distract me. I always think that there is something I have to correct, and at the end of the day, it's not. So I've got a warning that I can't avoid, and it forces me to go over logs, and I don't want to do that. Yes, we should take that into account. There is a similar thing to that, to be able to make builds and in testing. And so far, the testing object is not a main object and it's not called by anyone. So it helps you on that, as you said, but it complicates the question of warning. So we should consider a special case for that. And something similar to that is the question of build. Since it's not called by anyone, then you make a build of a test when in fact, although I don't want it for a normal case, I do want it. But so I'm taking down note of that because it wasn't that clear to me, but I agree. Yes, it's among the things that we want to do. Very well. I don't know if there is anything else. We are about to running out of time. Any other questions? I don't see anything else. No other questions in the chat. You're all very quiet. Well, as a final comment then, some of the things I think we've already said is that we are working on providing support to testing because of the value of testing, which is unarguable, to lower the barriers, as Enrique said, and as Ali said, there are barriers, and we are working on various issues, trying to lower those barriers, that it's easier to create, to manage data, to execute, so on and so forth. And the other leg to this is to have integrated testing in developing processes of integration and continuous delivery. So those are the main drivers that we are working on. Although there is a long way ahead, we understand that there is a lot of contribution being made to the product, and I think it's a very good time to take advantage of all those things. And of course, we are open to any suggestions and any comments that you can make. And that's when precise, I mean, everything that we're saying right now, you know, are things that we have in our minds, and those are not things that we are illuminated and but it's coming from GeneXus users who enrich us. So anything that you can contribute with, it's very, very welcome. Very well. Thank you, Jose. Thank you, all the team. Thank you for participating. This webinar will be recorded in GeneXus /webinar, and you can also register for our future events. So thank you very much for participating, and we'll keep in touch. See you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.